On June 26, 1944, at the Hollandia Air Base in Dutch New Guinea, Lieutenant Colonel Charles MacDonald glanced away from his ongoing checkers match with Lieutenant Colonel Merrill Smith, the operations officer for Satan's Angels. The game remained unresolved on the board as a visitor appeared at the screen door of the improvised lounge. The newcomer offered his name once more, his voice carrying a calm assurance that finally caught MacDonald's attention. Charles Lindbergh, the legendary Charles Lindbergh, the nation's most renowned pilot, stood there in this remote outpost far from the United States, seeking approval to explore tactics for P-38 combat missions. In that instant, both individuals could not foresee how this unexpected visit would reshape long-distance fighter tactics across the Pacific theater. During the ensuing 6 weeks, the methods Lindbergh shared would boost the operational reach of the Lockheed P-38 Lightning by almost 400 miles, converting missions once deemed unfeasible into everyday practice. Far beyond a simple engineering account, this episode chronicles the triumph over bureaucratic skepticism through compelling proof, as aviators came to rely on calculations rather than gut feelings, and how the expertise of a single individual in optimizing fuel use altered the dynamics of air combat in the region. The principles behind such expanded capabilities emerged not from technical guides, but from the hands-on lessons absorbed by flyers who discovered that their prior instruction on handling engines fell short of the full picture. What had seemed unattainable was on the verge of turning commonplace, guided by a 42-year-old outsider who had only piloted a P-38 for the first time 3 days before. The journey leading to that doorway in Hollandia traced back 17 years to a daring crossing of the Atlantic Ocean. In the span of May 20th to 21, 1927, Charles Augustus Lindbergh revolutionized the field of aviation through his solitary 3,600-mile journey from New York to Paris, completed in just 33.5 hours. Aboard the Ryan NYP monoplane known as the Spirit of St. Louis, he transported 450 gallons of fuel stored in oversized tanks that obstructed any direct view ahead. Relying on a periscope for sighting and the art of dead reckoning for guidance, Lindbergh controlled his fuel usage with an exactitude that fellow aviators from that time might have dismissed as overly cautious. Touching down at Le Bourget Field, he still had 85 gallons in reserve, a feat of efficiency that specialists had deemed unattainable for the Wright Whirlwind radial engine. This rigorous focus on fuel oversight emerged as Lindbergh's signature skill in technical matters. During the 1930s, while performing exploratory flights on behalf of Pan American Airways over the Pacific and Atlantic routes, he honed methods that pushed aircraft capabilities well past the ranges outlined by producers. Lindbergh recognized that the official range estimates in publications merely reflected typical performance, rather than absolute boundaries. Each aircraft engine possessed an ideal performance range in which output power, fuel efficiency, and structural strain achieved an impeccable equilibrium. Discovering this range demanded a profound grasp of how manifold pressure, propeller revolutions per minute, fuel mixture adjustments, and indicated airspeed interconnected, insights that surpassed conventional pilot instruction. By 1944, Lindbergh stood as a leading authority on extended-range aviation worldwide, yet his ties to the U.S. Armed Forces remained fraught due to his isolationist stance before the war. He had vigorously opposed U.S. entry into Europe's battles, spearheading the America First Committee and drawing sharp hostility from President Franklin Roosevelt. On April 29, 1941, following Roosevelt's public likening of him to Civil War Confederate sympathizer Clement Vallandigham, Lindbergh stepped down from his Air Corps Reserve Colonel's commission. Pearl Harbor's attack propelled America into the conflict, prompting Lindbergh to seek reinstatement in the Army Air Corps. Roosevelt intervened directly to bar Lindbergh from donning a U.S. military uniform for the duration of the war, though specialized knowledge often charts its own course. Barred from active duty, Lindbergh took on the role of a civilian advisor for aviation firms. In 1943, he aligned with United Aircraft Corporation, dedicating significant effort to their Chance-Vought division, makers of the F-4U Corsair. He also worked at Ford's Willow Run facility to resolve issues in B-24 Liberator assembly. Lindbergh conducted perilous high-altitude trials in P-47 Thunderbolts to evaluate engine capabilities. Additionally, he contributed to refining dive-bombing methods for the Corsair. His innovations proved invaluable, yet Lindbergh yearned for front-line action. Early in 1944, a chance arose. United Aircraft sought to assess the potential of a fresh twin-engine fighter design. The sole U.S. example in that class was the Lockheed P-38 Lightning. Lindbergh persuaded United Aircraft to dispatch him to the Pacific Theater as a technical observer, allowing him to examine P-38 performance in real wartime scenarios. On April 3, 1944, as he readied himself for the journey to the South Pacific, Lindbergh stopped at Brooks Brothers in New York to acquire a naval officer's uniform lacking any badges. From Brentano's bookstore, he picked up a compact New Testament, noting in his journal that same day, "Since I can only carry one book, and a very small one, that is my choice." Although it might seem like just over a decade had passed, the deeper my studies and readings take me, the fewer rivals it appears to face. Departing from San Diego on April 24th, he was officially en route to Marine Corps air facilities in the South Pacific region near Guadalcanal. While the Navy Department had approved the journey, it remained concealed from the White House. President Roosevelt himself, along with Secretary of the Navy Frank Knox, had no inkling that Lindbergh was venturing into the combat theater. What was initially framed as a mere scouting role evolved into far more after Marine Corps flight commanders urged him to join as an observer aboard actual battle flights. On May 21, 1944, Lindbergh undertook his debut combat flight, a low-level attack sweep alongside Marine Fighting Squadron 222, targeting the Japanese stronghold at Rabaul. The Marines labeled it as mere observation duty, yet Lindbergh activated his armament fully, firing at suitable targets as chances arose. He soon proved his hands-on skills surpassed mere book knowledge. Collaborating with seasoned squadron aviators, he instructed them in techniques for launching safely while carrying bomb payloads twice the F-4U's official limit. Previously, the Marines had suffered plane losses due to overload mishaps. Through Lindbergh's meticulous review of engine outputs, launch velocities, and load balancing, such incidents dropped sharply, even as the unit's bombing effectiveness rose. Throughout the Pacific Theater, reports circulated that the renowned flyer was participating in frontline operations as a non-military consultant, tackling technical challenges that had baffled service flyers for months on end. Come mid-June 1944, Lindbergh developed a keen curiosity about the P-38 Lightning. United Aircraft held sincere enthusiasm for twin-engined interceptors, yet Lindbergh was also aware that the 475th Fighter Group, known as Satan's Angels, ranked among the most dynamic P-38 units in the Pacific. To gain true insight into the aircraft, that group offered the ideal destination. On June 15, 1944, Lindbergh caught a ride to Finschhafen, New Guinea. There, he made his arrival known at 5th Air Force Headquarters in Nadzab, sharing a meal with Colonel Marion Cooper. That Sunday night, June 18th, he shared supper with General Ennis Whitehead, conversing about ongoing events in New Guinea and outlining his intentions to monitor P-38 activities. The permission he received was casual, unrecorded, and fell short of formal military protocols. In the flexible hierarchy of the Southwest Pacific Theater, interpersonal relationships and proven skills typically outweighed formal documentation. On June 20th, Lindbergh underwent a 1-hour and 20-minute familiarization flight in a P-38 alongside the 35th Squadron from the 8th Fighter Group. This marked his initial experience with the notable twin-boom aircraft. By June 26th, he had journeyed to Hollandia and interrupted Lieutenant Colonel MacDonald's ongoing checkers match. At just 29, MacDonald was already a decorated ace, with 10 confirmed victories, and led the 475th Fighter Group, a unit established in Australia on May 14, 1943, that had risen to become one of the theater's top-performing P-38 outfits in terms of aerial successes. Its 3 squadrons, the 401st, 432nd, and 433rd, operated the advanced P-38J variants, featuring enhanced intercoolers and boosted fuel storage. These Lightning fighters boasted the greatest reach among Pacific aircraft, enabling operations beyond the capabilities of any other planes. Yet, despite the use of auxiliary drop tanks, the P-38's effective range remained constrained. Extended sorties to far-off objectives often left scant reserves for evasive actions in battle, with aviators commonly landing back at base on critically low fuel levels. A number of planes had been lost to unplanned deviations caused by adverse weather that pushed beyond their endurance limits. MacDonald at first courteously brushed Lindbergh aside to resume his game. However, upon hearing that General Hutchinson, the commander of the 3rd Air Task Force, had dispatched him to explore tactics for P-38 engagements, MacDonald took notice. Following a short exchange, MacDonald inquired whether Lindbergh would care to join a combat sortie the following day. Lindbergh accepted the offer. The operation was set to commence as the sun rose. Instead of heading back to base command, MacDonald proposed that Lindbergh remain at the 475th camp to avoid any logistical hassles with travel. While Lindbergh made himself comfortable on the extra bunk, news quickly circulated throughout the squadron. Charles Lindbergh would be taking to the skies alongside Satan's Angels. The pilots' responses varied widely. Lieutenant John Purdy from the 433rd Squadron eagerly anticipated an encounter with the famed flyer. Not everyone shared his enthusiasm, though. Doubt lingered among several. Doubters wondered if a civilian of 42, no matter his renown, possessed the skills to navigate the rigors of contemporary warfare. For his part, Major Thomas Maguire, a pilot with 15 triumphs under his belt, who would conclude the conflict as the United States runner-up in aerial victories, boasting 38 verified successes, curiously awaited a demonstration of the veteran's capabilities. Come the dawn of June 27, 1944, Lindbergh readied himself for his inaugural sortie in a P-38. Conditions were unfavorable, with persistent drizzle beginning at 0530 hours. By the time the flight departed at 10:30, the weather had cleared up considerably. Leading the formation, MacDonald guided 4 planes toward the familiar objectives of Jeffman Island and Samart Airfield, which the 475th often targeted. Lindbergh served as Blue 3, positioned tightly on McGuire's wing. The 4th plane was under the control of Merrill Smith, a seasoned pilot with 8 confirmed victories already to his name. From his vantage point, MacDonald observed Lindbergh settling into an impeccable formation alongside McGuire. A remarkable display, considering the man had only recently qualified in the P-38. Their assignment called for a low-level attack on an enemy barge anchored in Caibos Bay. Dodging bursts of anti-aircraft fire, Lindbergh unleashed his cannon and machine guns, thoroughly shredding the vessel. The operation went off without a hitch, and every one of the 4 aircraft made it back to base intact. Yet, the observation made by the ground crew upon touchdown carried far greater weight than the skirmish itself. Following a series of sorties, the mechanics inspecting Lindbergh's P-38 uncovered a recurring trend. Time and again, his fighter came home with far more fuel in the tanks than those flown by fellow pilots on comparable flights. On July the 1st, during a lengthy armed reconnaissance lasting 6.5 hours over enemy airfields situated along the western edge of Gilvink Bay, Lindbergh touched down with 210 gallons still on board. In contrast, his comrades from the same patrol arrived with their gauges hovering just above empty. 2 days later, on July 3rd, the squadron provided cover for 16 B-25 bombers during a raid on Jeffman Island. Once the bombing run concluded, the Lightnings shifted to searching for barges. Less than an hour in, 2 of the pilots signaled critically low fuel levels and peeled away toward home base. Undeterred, Lindbergh pressed on, his instruments indicating ample margins. Spotting this unusual difference, MacDonald arranged a briefing. Just 2 days following Lindbergh's initial integration into the unit, the colonel assembled the 475th's aviators in their makeshift recreation area. The simple structure featured hard-packed earth underfoot and a roof woven from palm fronds, with little more than a single ping-pong table and a few packs of playing cards to occupy the space. Beneath a harsh glow of bare light bulbs, MacDonald wasted no time and dove right in. He presented Lindbergh to the group in an official manner, then prompted him to describe the methods behind his repeated success in bringing back surplus fuel unlike any other flyer in the unit. The events that followed would transform P-38 tactics across the entire Pacific theater. Taking his place in front of the gathered aviators, Lindbergh detailed the fuel-efficient cruising methods he had developed specifically for the Lightning. The routine protocol drilled into every P-38 operator involved maintaining speeds between 2,200 and 2,400 RPM while keeping the mixture on auto-rich. While this configuration delivered solid performance and was deemed reliable for the power plants, it came at the cost of excessive fuel use. Lindbergh demonstrated that pilots could slash their fuel burn substantially, without sacrificing practical cruising velocity, by dropping the RPM from the usual 2,200 to 1,600, switching the mixture to auto-lean instead of auto-rich, and making a modest boost in manifold pressure to offset the reduced revolutions. His precise recommendations included 1,600 RPM paired with 30 inches of mercury in manifold pressure, the mixture on auto-lean, and an indicated airspeed of 185 miles per hour. With these adjustments, fuel usage dropped to roughly 70 gallons per hour, yielding around 2.6 miles per gallon. In contrast to the conventional cruising parameters that guzzled far greater amounts of fuel, the efficiency gains proved staggering. Lindbergh forecasted that such approaches would extend the Lightning's operational reach by 400 miles, allowing for flights lasting up to 9 hours. As he wrapped up his talk some 30 minutes afterward, a profound hush settled over the chamber. The aviators pondered a series of troubling ideas. Extending their flights to 9 hours felt deeply unwelcome to individuals who already viewed 7-hour sorties as grueling ordeals. Inside the P-38's confined cockpit, space was at a premium. Crew members perched atop their parachutes, with a life raft and paddle stowed directly underneath. The bulky survival gear they wore added to the discomfort. Spending 7 hours in such tight quarters already tested the boundaries of physical tolerance. The prospect of 9 hours appeared utterly unimaginable. Even more disconcerting was Lindbergh's advice to operate the engines at configurations that their instructors had explicitly cautioned against. This setup, pairing reduced revolutions per minute with elevated manifold pressure, went by the term running over square. Doctrine from military aviation school stressed that such over-square running could severely harm the power plants. The ensuing knocking effect would make the cylinder heads run excessively hot, potentially resulting in total engine breakdown. Trainees learned that whenever manifold pressure surpassed RPM by even a small margin in inches, the danger of destroying the engines loomed large. Yet here was this outsider urging them to make a habit of flying in a mode their training had branded as hazardous. Doubt hung thick in the air. A few aviators traded uneasy looks. Others nodded in disbelief. One even voiced outright that Lindbergh's approach posed a real threat. Still, MacDonald grasped a key truth. Lindbergh drew from hands-on experience, not mere speculation. He had logged actual wartime flights employing precisely these parameters. The P-38 under his command experienced no issues with its engines. Time and again, his plane came back with ample fuel left over, offering a level of mission adaptability that eluded his fellow aviators. Determined to evaluate the method in real conditions, the colonel opted for hands-on trials. Success would grant the 475th a clear edge in combat operations. Any shortcomings would become evident in short order. During the following 7 days, squadron members started tentatively applying Lindbergh's recommended cruising parameters. Early sorties were kept brief, ensuring a swift retreat to the airfield should the power plants exhibit any warning signs of trouble. Those who first adopted the approach shared their concerns with unease, noting that the power units operated with an unfamiliar tone at the reduced revolutions per minute. The characteristic low growl from the Allison V-1710s shifted in its intensity. Yet, the instruments monitoring heat levels stayed steady within safe limits. The oil pressure remained consistently within safe limits. Temperatures in the cylinder heads, which serve as the key measure for detecting detonation, proved lower than those observed during operations at elevated RPM levels. With increasing assurance, aviators started applying Lindbergh's methods to more prolonged operations. The reductions in fuel use were impossible to dispute. Operations that once demanded a prompt withdrawal following attacks on objectives could now incorporate prolonged patrols in combat zones. Sorties that previously compelled aviators to vigilantly track their fuel levels now concluded with ample margins to spare. The P-38's practical range for engagement formerly around 570 miles, stretched to 700 miles, and subsequently to 750 miles. Aviators found they were able to access objectives previously deemed out of reach for the Lightning, engage in combat for 15 minutes directly above the target zone, and yet make it back to base with a full hour's worth of fuel still available. This shift marked a profound breakthrough. Doubts faded away as successive operations validated the method's reliability time and again. Lindbergh participated frequently alongside the 475th, logging flight time in battle conditions while instructing through his actions. He commanded formations, showing that the non-military visitor was capable of managing the rigors of aerial warfare just as competently as seasoned service flyers. During the operations under his direction, his radio identifier stayed straightforward: Mr. Lindbergh. Lindbergh broke down the underlying principles of the approach in clear terms that enabled aviators to grasp its rationale. The engines in aircraft generate thrust by igniting fuel to build force that propels the pistons. Fuel usage in engines is gauged by the rate at which fuel is consumed over a given period. The aim remains to optimize performance, generating maximum output while minimizing fuel expenditure. Conventional approaches relying on elevated revolutions per minute during cruising delivered abundant energy, yet they squandered resources since the motor operated at a frantic pace, expending fuel on redundant firings. Instead, lowering the revolutions per minute while boosting the pressure in the intake manifold allowed for equivalent output through diminished firing sequences, with each one consuming fuel more effectively. Adopting a lean fuel-air blend enhanced this further by supplying precisely the amount needed for full ignition, avoiding the surplus that auto-rich configurations employed to prevent overheating during intense operations. Detonation was averted in these engines, as the configuration, despite exceeding a square ratio in terms of revolutions and pressure, did not qualify as true high-output mode. A manifold pressure reading of 30 inches proved modest, far short of the 60-inch peaks reserved for urgent wartime boosts during launches and engagements. Moreover, the decreased revolutions per minute eased the physical strain on the engine's parts. Far from hazardous, this method merely diverged from the standard training pilots received. Charles Lindbergh drew upon a wealth of knowledge gained through extensive involvement in extended-distance aviation. The groundbreaking transatlantic journey he completed in 1927 demonstrated to him that the figures listed in official manuals served merely as baselines rather than absolute boundaries. During the 1930s, his efforts with Pan American Airways in mapping out trans-Pacific and transatlantic pathways afforded him countless hours to refine strategies for handling fuel loads. What set the P-38 apart was a feature that reduced the dangers of such testing far below initial appearances. Its dual-engine design provided a crucial safety net. Should one motor sustain harm from the novel cruising method, the remaining one could still guide the flyer back to base. Across the immense expanse of the Pacific, where any breakdown in a lone-engine aircraft often led to fatal submersion or seizure by Japanese forces, aviators in those machines typically operated with utmost caution. Yet the P-38's built-in backup allowed for bolder pushes into uncharted performance territories without undue peril. Lindbergh also recognized, based on logistics reports, that any potential hazards remained manageable. The Allison Company was dispatching ample reserves of V-17-10 engines and components to the theater in abundance. Thus, If testing led to the need for an engine swap, maintenance teams on the ground could swiftly fit a new unit. The potential gains in mission reach made it worthwhile to tolerate a modest chance of accelerated motor degradation. This assessment turned out to be spot on. None of the P-38 power plants gave out as a result of the cruising approaches Lindbergh advocated. Come the end of July 1944, these methods for optimizing flight efficiency began disseminating widely among P-38 squadrons in the 5th Air Force. The triumphs achieved by the 475th Fighter Group stood out too prominently to overlook. News of their feats circulated rapidly to neighboring outfits as aviators shared stories, and support staff exchanged notes on fuel usage. Leaders from additional groups sought to replicate the edge that Satan's angels had secured. Lindbergh delivered further briefings to airmen from various commands. With patience, he detailed the process, fielding inquiries on mechanics and easing worries over power plant reliability. While the uptake wasn't swift or total, it progressed reliably over time. On July 28, 1944, Charles Lindbergh experienced his most intense encounter while serving with the 475th Fighter Group. That day involved an escort operation for bombers heading toward the Sierra region, during which he operated alongside the 433rd Squadron. Positioned as Blue 3 within a formation of 4 planes, Lindbergh's group spotted hostile planes above El Paputi Bay. The adversaries consisted of a pair of Mitsubishi Ki-51 Sonyas, Japanese aircraft designed as light bombers primarily for scouting missions and strikes against ground targets, that were heading back after an effort to locate a lost fellow pilot. These Sonyas were part of the 73rd Independent Flying Chutai, with one under the command of the squadron's leader, Captain Saburo Shimada, and the second flown by Sergeant Yokogi. The U.S. pilots then launched their assault. The Japanese Sonya bombers found themselves hopelessly inferior to their adversaries, lagging in speed, agility, and firepower against the P-38 Lightnings. These planes ought to have fallen swiftly. Yet Shimada, a seasoned aviator determined to survive, refused to yield without a struggle. What began as a straightforward clash evolved into a prolonged pursuit across the skies. Aircraft from the 9th Fighter Squadron's P-38S had already intercepted the Sonyas and were locked in combat by the time McDonald's group joined the fray. Shimada's companion, Sergeant Yokogi, took a direct hit from cannon rounds unleashed by Lieutenant Wade Lewis, igniting flames along the Sonya's left wing. While the damaged foe veered straight to flee, Lieutenant J.C. Haslip maneuvered into position astern and unleashed an extended salvo. Billowing smoke, the crippled Sonya plummeted toward the ocean below. Undeterred, Shimada pressed on with his own machine. Over the course of half an hour, the Japanese leader deftly evaded assaults from several P-38s. He hurled his bomber into sharp, aggressive rolls, vapor trails trailing from the wingtips amid extreme, tight spirals. The American pilots struggled to anticipate the target's path and maintain their sights, their efforts thwarted by the geometry of the chase. The ponderous enemy craft possessed the advantage in tight radius maneuvers, circling within the arc of the swifter U.S. interceptors. McDonald's wingman, Captain Danforth Miller, at one point aligned the Sonya squarely in his crosshairs for a fleeting moment, only to break away when Shimada executed a steep port bank. Miller's tracer rounds streaked harmlessly 80 feet short of the mark. In an astonishing turn, Shimada abandoned his dodging tactics and steered straight at the oncoming Lindbergh. The planes hurtled toward one another in a direct confrontation, converging at almost 500 miles per hour. For Lindbergh, an aviator with countless hours in the sky yet no prior brush with hostile fighters intent on his destruction, the instant sharpened into stark horror. Shimada maintained his trajectory unwaveringly. Whether he aimed to ram the enemy or just trade shots in this frontal clash, the Japanese pilot locked onto an inevitable impact path. Lindbergh, acting on reflex, aligned his sights with the Sonya's radial engine and squeezed the trigger. From the P-38's nose poured a barrage from its 20mm cannon and 4 50-caliber machine guns. Lindbergh kept firing steadily for 6 seconds. Projectiles tore into the Sonya's forward section. The Mitsubishi's propeller lost speed, visible to the eye. Thick smoke billowed from the power plant. Yet Shimada pressed on, undeterred. Only at the final instant did Lindbergh yank back hard on the controls, his P-38 skimming just above the crippled Sonya by mere feet. Shimada's plane plunged into a sharp descent. Additional salvos came from other P-38s. The Sonya kept plummeting, belching smoke, before smashing into the sea at full throttle. A burst of white foam erupted on contact. Ripples radiated outward across the waves. Soon, the disturbance faded, and the ocean resumed its prior stillness. Captain Saburo Shimada and his observer had perished. Upon returning to their base, the pilots debated who deserved credit for downing the Sonya. Several airmen had struck the enemy plane. MacDonald, Miller, and Lindbergh each landed blows. Yet it was Lindbergh's direct frontal attack that delivered the decisive damage, crippling the propeller's rotation and triggering the aircraft's lethal plunge. Among themselves, the flyers quietly concurred that Lindbergh had earned the triumph. This marked his sole combat victory. However, the feat went unlogged in the 475th Fighter Group's formal combat ledger. As a civilian observer, Lindbergh's involvement in the fighting was unconventional to begin with. Formalizing such a kill could spark inquiries that threatened to curtail his attachment to the squadron. Just 3 days afterward, on August 1st, Lindbergh came perilously close to losing his life. That day's assignment involved a sweeping patrol by fighters over the Palo Islands. During a mission, the aircraft came under attack from Japanese Zero fighters. In the fierce aerial skirmish that followed, Lindbergh became locked in a tight maneuvering duel with one of the Zero's pilots, who came perilously close to downing him. It was MacDonald's timely action, shouting, break right," over the radio before diving in to take on the Zero personally, that ultimately preserved Lindbergh's life. This harrowing incident persuaded the command at 5th Air Force Headquarters that the risks had grown too severe. Lindbergh had already demonstrated the effectiveness of his methods beyond doubt. Throughout his time in the Pacific, he had completed roughly 50 combat sorties, among them around 25 flights in the P-38 alongside the 475th. He had managed to claim a single enemy plane as a victory. Yet he had also escaped death by the narrowest of margins. The decision was clear. It was essential to bring him back to the United States without further delay, lest disaster strike permanently. Departing from Hollandia on August 12, 1944, Lindbergh set off for the journey home. Members of the 475th Fighter Group assembled to bid him farewell, their admiration for the visiting civilian advisor heartfelt and sincere. Far from merely instructing them on ways to stretch their operational range, he had shared their dangers in the sky, battled alongside them, and earned his place through raw performance in the unforgiving arena of war, where status and celebrity held no sway. The influence of Lindbergh's strategies for conserving fuel reached well past the confines of the 475th Fighter Group. Come October 1944, squadrons flying P-38s across the Pacific Theater had adapted versions of his recommended cruising configurations. While the exact figures differed a bit depending on the group and the circumstances, the underlying approach applied everywhere. By reducing engine revolutions per minute, boosting manifold pressure, and using a leaner fuel mixture, the aircraft's endurance saw a remarkable increase. These changes carried far-reaching consequences for combat operations. Previously unattainable objectives now fell within reach. Enemy installations in Japanese-controlled areas, once shielded from interception by escort fighters, suddenly confronted P-38s equipped with sufficient fuel to engage over the site and make it back to base without incident. This newfound capability permitted fighter aircraft to accompany bombers on sorties that earlier had lacked protection or simply never launched. Extended patrols by fighters could now venture further into regions under Japanese control. Squadrons of P-38s operating from Dutch New Guinea quickly began covering 950 miles to strike objectives, engaging in combat for 15 minutes, and then safely withdrawing to their home fields. Prior to the widespread implementation of Lindbergh's methods, such undertakings had been out of the question. The boost in operational distance was far from insignificant. During the latter part of 1944, this expanded combat radius facilitated missions that bolstered MacArthur's push toward the Philippines. Landing strips that existing fighter capabilities couldn't sustain turned into practical staging points for advancing forces. Assault strategies that once depended on securing nearer air bases could advance at a swifter pace. The broader effects extended beyond mere distances, influencing timelines as well. What might have stretched over months wrapped up in mere weeks, thanks to the ability of fighters to extend their protective reach more rapidly. Moreover, the approach preserved pilot lives. Aviators who once limped back with tanks reading empty now carried extra fuel for unforeseen crises. Diversions caused by poor visibility no longer spelled doom for planes. Those taking hits during battles stood a greater likelihood of limping to safety. These additional fuel supplies created a buffer that notably cut down on aircraft losses stemming from factors unrelated to direct enemy action. The prolonged reach showed its true worth amid the campaign to free the Philippines. As MacArthur's troops stormed Leyte in October 1944, P-38s launching from fields in New Guinea and Morotai delivered aerial protection across spans that had seemed inconceivable just prior. Arriving at the objective with zero margin for error versus having a full hour's worth of fuel marked the line between delivering robust support and offering only a token presence. Still, integrating these innovations sparked debate. Certain leaders at first pushed back, fretting over potential engine failures. A number of aviators held doubts, favoring their formal instruction over input from an outsider. Ground crew supervisors expressed concerns regarding accelerated engine deterioration. Nevertheless, the results spoke for themselves. Reports from units employing Lindbergh's methods indicated that engine failure rates remained unchanged. Records of fuel usage revealed striking enhancements in efficiency. Accounts from missions highlighted achievements in tasks previously deemed unfeasible. In the closing months of 1944, the cruise control approach pioneered by Lindbergh earned formal inclusion in the P-38's standard protocols, an insight initially offered by a non-military technical advisor had evolved into established military practice. The United States Army Air Forces issued revised charts for P-38 cruise control, incorporating the innovations Lindbergh had identified. Materials for training pilots underwent updates to emphasize the correct procedure for lean-of-peak mixture settings. Lindbergh's overall involvement in the Pacific theater paints a picture of an individual propelled by multifaceted drives. Before the outbreak of war, Lindbergh's staunch isolationist views had rendered him a polarizing personality in public discourse. Remarks he made regarding advancements in aircraft design under the Nazi regime in Germany drew sharp criticism, with many labeling him as sympathetic to the fascist cause. His outspoken resistance to the United States joining the conflict in Europe severed ties with President Roosevelt entirely. As hostilities erupted, Lindbergh became an outcast in American society, even though his feats in aviation ranked among the nation's finest. Yet, in the distant Pacific arena, removed from the intrigue of the capital, he achieved a form of atonement by demonstrating exceptional expertise in his field. The aviators from the Marine Corps and Army Air Forces who shared missions with him assessed his worth based solely on proficiency in the cockpit and bravery under fire, setting aside any ideological divides. Major Richard Bong, who held the record as America's top aerial combatant with 40 confirmed kills earned during his time at V Fighter Command Headquarters and with multiple squadrons throughout the region, shared with a United Press correspondent that Lindbergh matched the hottest pilots in their group. He would have been out there taking down Japanese foes daily, had General Kenny permitted it. Such praise from a figure of Bong's stature carried greater weight than any formal restoration of his standing in political circles. In the crucible of battle, Lindbergh had validated his abilities precisely where validation counted the most. Upon his return to the continental United States, in the middle of August 1944, he persisted in offering vital technical support to the ongoing military campaign. That same October, he joined an inter-service Army-Navy symposium focused on the capabilities of fighter planes, held at Naval Air Station Patuxent River in Maryland. There, he piloted and tested seized Japanese planes, delivering valuable analysis of their operational strengths. He went on to advise United Aircraft along with various other producers, addressing challenges that emerged during frontline engagements. The precise engineering details of Lindbergh's work underscore the scale of the enhancements he facilitated. The P-38J Lightning featured an internal fuel load of 410 gallons in its baseline configuration, comprising two 90-gallon main tanks, two 60-gallon auxiliary reserves, and two 55-gallon tanks embedded in the wing leading edges. Equipped with auxiliary fuel tanks mounted externally, the aircraft's overall fuel load could surpass 1,000 gallons. Operating under typical cruising conditions, such as 2,200 revolutions per minute with the mixture set to automatic rich, fuel usage differed depending on reports, yet it remained notably greater than the approach pioneered by Lindbergh. His method managed to lower the total burn rate to around 70 gallons each hour. As a result, the effective combat reach expanded from roughly 570 miles to 750 miles, while maintaining identical provisions for engagement and emergency reserves, which marked a 31% enhancement. In scenarios demanding the utmost endurance, the integration of extra disposable tanks alongside Lindbergh's cruising strategies enabled sorties lasting nearly 9 hours and spanning more than 1,000 miles. Such advancements reshaped the dynamics of warfare in the Pacific theater. The methodical leapfrogging of islands that defined General MacArthur's progression across New Guinea and onward to the Philippines depended on securing dominance in the skies at every interval. The operational distance of fighter planes dictated whether certain atolls could be skipped or if they necessitated full-scale landings to establish forward air bases. Through the expanded capabilities afforded by Lindbergh's innovations, commanders gained the flexibility for more aggressive tactics. Territories that might otherwise have demanded expensive seaborne invasions could now be circumvented, as interceptors proved able to strike objectives from farther-flung staging areas. Certain scholars have erroneously linked Lindbergh's endurance-boosting methods to the April 1943 operation that downed the plane carrying Japanese Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto. That raid, executed by P-38 aircraft from the 339th Fighter Squadron operating out of Guadalcanal, certainly tested the outer boundaries of the Lightning's potential. However, Lindbergh played no role in its execution. Lindbergh's entry into the Pacific theater came more than a year after initial operations began. His key contribution lay in transforming those grueling long-distance flights from rare feats into standard practice. It's essential to highlight the personal side of what Lindbergh accomplished. At the age of 42, he joined the fight in the Pacific, engaging in aerial combat with enemy flyers who were 2 decades his junior. The rigors of pulling high G-forces during sharp turns, the intense pressure of battle, and the physical strain from enduring 7 to 9 hour sorties in a tight fighter cockpit, all exacted a heavy price. Yet Lindbergh sought no privileges or accommodations. He undertook identical assignments, confronted identical risks, and adhered to the identical protocols as the fresh-faced lieutenants and captains who formed the core of the 475th Fighter Group. His commitment to validating his methods through hands-on participation proved vital for gaining their trust. Had he merely delivered talks on fuel conservation from the relative security of base command, the aviators would likely have brushed him off as yet another armchair expert, oblivious to the harsh truths of frontline flying. Instead, by taking to the skies himself and repeatedly showing that his approaches succeeded in real conditions, he built a level of respect that neither his status nor his celebrity could have alone secured. Lindbergh's triumphs carried psychological weight that reached further than just optimizing fuel use. He illustrated how skills from civilian backgrounds could play a pivotal role in wartime flying. Armed forces, by tradition, prioritize hierarchy and battlefield seasoning. However, the intricacies of contemporary conflict demanded a level of engineering know-how that frequently lay beyond the reach of uniformed hierarchies. Lindbergh showed that non-military specialists possessing niche expertise could substantially boost operational performance when afforded a chance to engage. This breakthrough prompted wartime leaders to heed input from non-combatant advisors linked to plane builders, power plant firms, and scientific groups. Such enhanced collaboration between service personnel and outside innovators hastened advancements in technology across the entire conflict. Credit must also go to the P-38 Lightning as the machine that facilitated Lindbergh's strategies. Its dual-engine setup offered the backup reliability essential for testing boundaries with less peril. Although the Allison V-1710 power plants drew frequent complaints for their shortcomings, they performed reliably under precise control of fuel-air ratios. The fighter's elaborate fueling setup, featuring numerous reservoirs and shifting mechanisms, permitted aviators to distribute resources with precision. Moreover, the plane's inherent steadiness rendered it ideal for extended periods of steady, efficient travel. Toward the close of 1944 and the dawn of 1945, certain combat zones saw the P-38 giving way to the P-51 Mustang, a plane that excelled in high-altitude operations and covered greater distances on equivalent fuel supplies. Yet in the Pacific theater, the P-38 held its ground as an indispensable asset right up to the war's end. The dual-engine design ensured greater security during flights across vast expanses of ocean. Its formidable array of weapons unleashed overwhelming destructive power. The plane's agility in lower and mid-level altitudes aligned perfectly with the demands of battles in that region. Moreover, its endurance, particularly when pilots applied the fuel-conserving methods pioneered by Lindbergh, stood out as truly remarkable. The end-of-war figures paint a vivid picture. Exclusively operating P-38s, the 475th Fighter Group racked up 551 confirmed kills in the air, establishing it as the leading P-38 squadron of the conflict. The United States' runner-up ace, Major Thomas Maguire, who tallied 38 triumphs, piloted P-38s while serving with the 475th. This blend of extended reach, potent weaponry, and dependable performance positioned the P-38 as the preeminent interceptor in the Pacific. Furthermore, the boosted operational radius from Lindbergh's innovations amplified all facets of P-38 missions. Sorties extended to more distant targets, engagements lasted longer, and returns home proved more secure. Across countless missions and untold hours in the sky, the overall effect defied precise measurement, yet it was undeniably profound. This account also underscores the occasionally tense dynamic between specialized knowledge and established organizations. Lindbergh's stances on politics before the war had rendered him persona non grata in any formal role within the armed forces. The deep-seated hostility from President Roosevelt barred him from donning a military uniform. Nevertheless, the Army Air Force desperately required the precise skills that Lindbergh brought to the table. Their workaround, an informal civilian role backed by official permission to join combat missions, was unconventional and would almost certainly breach today's standards. Still, it proved effective. What had been a stiff, bureaucratic framework yielded to practical needs on the ground. In the end, this arrangement greatly advanced the Allied cause in the conflict. Those who shared the skies with Lindbergh during 1944 carried his lessons with them for life. Even years afterward, in conversations recorded long after the fact, pilots from the 475th Fighter Group expressed admiration for the non-military figure who had soared alongside them as a peer, and shown them how to extend their range beyond initial expectations. Colonel Warren Lewis, leader of the 432nd Squadron at the time, could still recite Lindbergh's techniques for conserving fuel with remarkable accuracy many years on. While the details shifted a bit across various retellings, owing to adjustments for varying circumstances and plane types, the core idea applied everywhere, and its impact was beyond question. Charles Augustus Lindbergh passed away on August 26, 1974, at the age of 72, succumbing to lymphoma in his residence in Kipahulu, Maui. He had quietly departed from Columbia Presbyterian Medical Center in New York on August 17th, reaching Maui only a week prior to his passing. Following his passing, Lindbergh received a modest burial roughly 3 hours later, placed in a rudimentary coffin crafted by local Hawaiian ranch hands, dressed in his everyday labor attire, and laid to rest in a 30-foot deep excavation, reinforced with lava stones and dark sands from the nearby shore, at the Palapala Ho'omau Church Cemetery. Just 15 individuals were present for the ceremony. Marking the site stands a plain concrete panel, inscribed with a verse from Psalm 139. "If I take the wings of the morning, and dwell in the uttermost parts of the sea." His journals from the war years, released to the public in 1970, offered vivid descriptions of his duties in the Pacific, encompassing his involvement with the 475th. The enduring impact of Lindbergh's contributions in the Pacific reached further than the particular methods he shared. He exemplified enduring concepts that continue to hold value. Proficiency in technical matters plays a crucial role during military engagements. Experts from civilian backgrounds can make substantial impacts when afforded the chance. Established protocols warrant scrutiny and refinement whenever compelling proof justifies it. Hands-on illustration carries greater weight than theoretical discourse. And above all, even in seemingly perfected frameworks, opportunities for enhancement persist. Ultimately, Lindbergh's accomplishments in the Pacific embodied a rare convergence of profound technical insight and pressing tactical demands. The battles in that theater required fighters to achieve unprecedented distances. Conventional approaches constrained their reach to levels short of the plane's inherent engineering potential. Drawing from his long-standing emphasis on optimization, Lindbergh brought unparalleled understanding of fuel utilization. Circumstances allowed him to deploy this knowledge amid real wartime scenarios, where outcomes could be assessed with clear metrics. With resolve, he tested his methods firsthand, endangering himself to validate his ideas. Moreover, he collaborated alongside aviators on equal footing, foregoing any deference to his celebrity status. The account of German captives encountering the formidable scale of American manufacturing highlighted a shift in mindset, driven by irrefutable displays of superior resources. Lindbergh's narrative, by contrast, illustrated an evolution in capabilities through tangible mastery of skills. Each tale underscores how profound triumphs often emerge not from sheer power, but from the skillful deployment of insight, substantiated by direct action. Those German detainees went back to their homeland, aware that systems rooted in democracy could generate vast plenty. Similarly, the U.S. fighter pilots instructed by Lindbergh acquired skills that amplified their mission success rates, all while ensuring their safe return. The P-38 Lightning remained operational right through the close of the conflict, its signature twin-boom profile standing as an emblem of U.S. aerial strength across the Pacific theater. Those who piloted the plane recall it fondly, even with all its eccentricities and demands, and the aviators who operated it during 1944 and beyond also honor the non-military expert who showed them that what seemed unattainable was simply demanding, that official specifications served as initial benchmarks rather than absolute constraints, and that true insight could reveal potentials overlooked in everyday operations. Such is the enduring impact of Lindbergh in the Pacific theater. It lies not in battlefield triumphs or completed sorties, but in the wisdom imparted and the skills conveyed. He entered the scene as a mere onlooker and exited as an instructor. He showed up as a famous figure and left as a trusted peer, reshaping what an airplane could achieve solely by grasping its inner workings deeply and boldly, demonstrating superior approaches. The members of Satan's Angels recognized the gift Lindbergh had bestowed upon them. Thanks to his freely offered expertise on conserving fuel, a subject he knew more thoroughly than any other figure in the Pacific, they extended their range, sustained engagements, and came back with greater security. This expertise, validated through actual fighting and embraced across the region, stands as one of the Pacific Air War's most effective advancements in technology. Yet it originated not from research facilities or design teams, but from a single individual's refined expertise in a craft he had honed 17 years prior across the Atlantic Ocean. When that expertise shifted to a new setting with unfamiliar planes, it held the same worth in 1944 as it had in 1927. The core idea endured: to know the machine inside out, to handle its assets with exacting care, and to reject the notion that stated thresholds marked true ceilings. Lindbergh embodied this idea in his own life, and over 6 weeks that summer of 1944, he passed it on to some of the Pacific's most skilled interceptor pilots, who then disseminated it further, altering the very nature of America's aerial campaign in the Pacific.